At long last, we've broken out of the summer patterns, enjoying 73 degrees here with some rain. This is some older footage. It's way too wet to fly today, but anyway, that's kind of what the sky looks like right now. There's the radar from Fort Worth at this hour. Not a whole lot of activity in the Fort Worth warning area, but down around Austin and around the San Antonio area, Houston, a little bit more vigorous activity. The air is a little bit more unstable in that region. But I don't know if any of you have noticed, it looks like College DuPage has updated their viewer from Flash to HTML5. So that's what I'm using here. I've seen this display here for the first time yesterday. So that's definitely some positive changes there. Flash, of course, is being phased out on a lot of websites this year. And of course, we do have some rain further up the boundary through Arkansas, of course, and also Tennessee. Seeing the Nashville radar here. Cells moving progressively to the east-northeast, and we can pretty much follow that all the way up into Virginia. Getting some cells out there around Blacksburg and Roanoke. And it looks like that'll be heading into the Washington, D.C. area later today. And there's what it looks like at this time. So let's go to the charts and see what's happening. The surface chart across the southeastern U.S. looking like this. Outflow boundary from just east of Little Rock down through the Lufkin area all the way to Austin and San Antonio. And you see that temperature contrast, 95 over 69 at San Antonio versus 76 at Austin. So there's no question where that outflow is. Lurking back behind the outflow pools, we do find the real cold front. There it is right there. It's a little bit difficult to find, but we do see behind it a very consistent northerly flow shifting around to northwesterly up in the Great Lakes. There's that convective complex there in Texas. It looks like it is losing steam. The anvils are definitely looking more fibrous, and I don't see as many convective elements down in Texas, but with unstable air lurking down to the south, I would expect that to get going this evening as afternoon heating kicks in. Pretty quiet across the southeastern U.S., the usual boundaries down in Florida, but even today they seem a little bit shut down. And then up in Oklahoma along the true cold front, looks like a few cells going up in that area. We can kind of see the cold front on the Oklahoma mesonet. Looks like that's it right there, and it kind of loses definition as you go further south. Maybe something like that in through there. But you can see as you go to the southeast, you get into fresher outflow air, 74 over 72 with recent rain. So this area here is going to be on the backside of that convective complex. And you see the southerly flow coming up from those old storms down to the south. In the northeast U.S., more changes on the way. What do we make of this satellite photo? We do see a lot of cloud material from the Ohio River Valley up to New York and New England. This whole area here is likely to be warm air advection. And then the clear area behind, especially with those cloud streets coming out of the west-northwest, this is likely going to be an area of cold air advection. So likely what we're seeing here is troughing out to the west and ridging out to the east. And conditions kind of on the warm side out there and cold out to the west. Now, we've had this pervasive cold air advection pattern there in Canada for maybe 1 to 2 weeks now. And with the solar angles lowering and the days getting shorter, we are starting to prime parts of Canada with cold air. It's getting to be about that season. We certainly do see that on the surface map. There are lots of 50s up there, gusty winds, 60s up in Manitoba, and you have to go all the way to the Dakotas to find the 80s. Now, one day of 60s and 50s up in Ontario, that would be one thing, but this has been going on for probably over a week now. So we're really starting to build the depth of cold air up there in the Hudson Bay region. And I'll show you a bit of that coming up on the GFS forecast momentarily. But there's the northern edge of the cold front, the triple point around Watertown, New York, and that's going to correspond to the strongest baroclinicity along that boundary. So we've got a pretty good chance of developing a wave up there in New York over the next 24 hours. And even across western Canada, very cold, gusty weather. So if you're doing a cross-country drive from Toronto to Vancouver, you've definitely got to pack that coat with you. Series of polar fronts from northwestern Montana across the Dakotas, and very good warm air advection downslope conditions in Wyoming and western South Dakota, and temperatures coming up to almost 90 degrees around the Rapid City area. But we've got that very strong frontal boundary up there north of Great Falls, and winds are gusting to almost 44 knots up there in northern Montana. That's about 50 miles an hour, and that's a lot of cold air coming down out of Alberta. And there's how things look on the satellite imagery. Pretty obvious we're transitioning to a northwesterly flow, and that's going to help bring the cold air southeastward. But overall, looks pretty quiet across much of the northwestern U.S., except for the system up there in Montana. And then looking down at Arizona, yeah, the monsoon pattern is shut down right now. Things are dominated by northwesterly flow, and for any weather, we've got to go out to Texas. Looks like some of that moisture wrapping around the backside of that frontal system that's through that area. There's a surface map of the sour across the southwestern U.S. Looks like that old frontal system kind of decaying there, being mixed out, although there is some strong northerly flow aloft. Now we do see mid-60s dew points in southern Arizona. The problem, though, if we look at the forecast sounding, is there is a lot of warm mid and upper level conditions and northerly flow, and also some dry air aloft. So those are some negative factors, and as a result, if we advance this up to the 12-hour point, you can see that we're left with 50-degree dew points at the surface, only about 4,000 to 5,000 feet deep, and there's no way we can get a thunderstorm out of that. If it did, it would be very high-based. There may be a few on the mountains down to the south around the Tucson, Ajo area, but the model, you can see, not going for very much coverage, just pretty much right there along the Arizona-Mexico border. So here's the next big change coming up over the next week. We're looking at the 850 millibar temperature anomaly. This is up at about 5,000 feet, and it gets rid of some of the effects of diurnal heating and radiational cooling, and kind of evens that out from hour to hour. So we're looking at a chart here for midday right now, and you can see the cold air definitely in place up there in central Canada. There's that big cold air mass. And, of course, we are cycling a little bit of warm air up in that region also. So let's see what happens over the next week or so. In fact, yeah, there's that little cold front and warm front that we just saw. Moving that forward, you can see a pretty good cold front moving south through the Dakotas. There's all that cold air coming out of the Northwest Territories, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and that makes its way into the Great Lakes area and the Midwest. Now we can see the bulk of it is kind of going into the Great Lakes and Quebec and Ontario. Not much southward progress with that. But let's see what happens into Friday and Saturday. Well, Canada is just still chock-filled with cold air. Now there is some warm air developing out in the Rockies, but let's go into Saturday and Sunday, and you can see we're developing another big chunk of cold air in the Northwest Territories and Southwest Nunavut. What happens to that? Well, it just so happens we've got a northwesterly flow set up due to a big ridge on the west coast producing a lot of this warm air, actually. So here's that next chunk on Sunday. What happens? We roll that forward and it really pulls together. Now, granted, this is 132 hours out, but this is getting in the range of the GFS window of accuracy, I guess you can call it. And you can see temperatures 15 to 20 Celsius below normal in Montana, and that just keeps pushing south out towards Texas and the lower Mississippi River Valley. And this has got an unusually southward progress. Now, this far out, 168 to 180 hours out, it's a little bit up in the air, the exact trajectory. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it moved a little bit more like this. So that's something you're going to look for as far as trends in the model. But I think the general idea of cold air coming out of Canada, that's going to be pretty accurate. So going with this forecast of it going straight down to Texas, that's going to mean highs in the 60s and lows in the 40s and 50s. So we'll see about that. But anyway, it does look like some cold air somewhere east of the Rockies for next week. And another little shot coming down, and then things moderate a little bit, except up in the Great Lakes. Now, another way we can kind of see what's going on is with the thickness. So we'll go ahead and move on over to the thickness chart. Now, it's going to be kind of hard to see, but it's going to be these dashed red and dashed blue lines. The 540 contour, that generally separates rain from snow, and there's that contour. So certainly cold enough to snow up there in the Arctic right now, and even down into parts of the Northwest Territories. So what I want you to watch here is to kind of look at the red, especially where it's kind of packed together like right there, and also kind of look at the blue. Don't worry too much about the black lines, but I'm going to run this forward through the rest of this week. And what we see is there's some pretty good packing of the red up there in the northern U.S. and Canada, so that means there's a good temperature gradient. Very likely what's happening is that there's a frontal boundary in place somewhere through that area. And then if we roll that forward into the weekends, Sunday and Monday, you can see some pretty good packing in here. In fact, it's kind of hard to see, but something like that right there. That's the polar front in the Central Plains with some cold air coming down, and that 540 contour starting to come into the northern U.S. And we see that gradient really takes shape there, especially towards Tuesday and Wednesday next week. And that gradient moves down into the U.S. proper, and that means that the front is going to be running about like that. So we're pushing this big old 1034 millibar high into Montana on Tuesday, and we're pushing cold air south into the central U.S. So as I mentioned, there's probably going to be some adjustments to how exactly this plays out, but it is very interesting for September, and I finally think that that is going to break us out of the summer doldrums and give us some cool stuff to look at for next week. And the pattern here, very meridional. If we actually just look at all the banding of lines, see this right here? That means that there's a lot of transport of heat north and south. That's going to be a very dynamic pattern that's going to create a lot of interesting weather over the next 200, 250 hours. And I think we should take a look at the upper level patterns. Let's do that real quick. We'll go up to 200 millibars. Now what we see here is a very flat pattern, very strong winds. These straight runs, they tend to be very dynamically unstable. So these tend to buckle, kind of like pushing a sheet of paper together. You know, you do that and you get these sharp bends and loops going on. And that's kind of what happens here. That kind of buckles, and right there, see, there it goes. And that's what's going to help kick some of the cold air from the polar regions south early next week. So, yeah, things buckling right there, high meridional pattern, and then things kind of ease off towards the end of next week. Anyway, that's kind of a run-through of the weather we're expecting here before not too long. So I hope you'll stick around and join us for Forecast Lab this week and next week. Hope to see you soon, and we'll be back tomorrow for another program. Take care and have a great evening. Bye-bye.